Hello and welcome to the second book in James Herriot's Memoirs of Being a Vet. The first one entitled If Only They Could Talk. This one, which I've already read but not on YouTube, It Shouldn't Happen to a Vet. And incidentally, this and the If Only They Could Talk makes up the basis for the episodes of the original screenings of All Creatures Great and Small from 1978 to about 82, and then from about 89 to 91 or 92, something like that. So I shall close my curtain, which now makes it too dark. That's typical. So this is in 33 chapters. So what I shall do, I shall read 3 chapters at a time per video. And this also has an afterword by Carol Drinkwater, the person who played the original lass who married James Herriot in the programme. So, let us begin. It Shouldn't Happen to a Vet. Chapter 1. I could see that Mr. Hanshaw didn't believe a word I was saying. He looked down at his cow and his mouth tightened into a stubborn line. Broken pelvis? You're trying to tell me she'll never get up no more? Why, look at her chewing her cud. I'll tell you this, young man. Me dad would have soon got her up if he'd been alive today. I had been a veterinary surgeon for a year now, and I had learned a few things. One of them was that farmers weren't easy men to convince, especially Yorkshire Dalesmen. And that bit about his dad. Mr. Hanshaw was in his 50s, and I suppose there was something touching about his faith in his late father's skill and judgment, but I could have done very nicely without it. It had acted as an additional irritant in a case in which I felt I had troubles enough, because there are few things which get more deeply under a vet's skin than a cow which won't get up. To the layman, it may seem strange that an animal can be apparently cured of its original ailment and yet be unable to rise from the floor, but it happens. And it can be appreciated that a completely recumbent milk cow has no future. The case had started when my boss, Siegfried Farnan, who owned the practice in the little Dales market town of Darrowby, sent me to a milk fever. This suddenly occurring calcium deficiency attacks high-yielding animals just after calving and causes collapse and progressive coma. When I first saw Mr. Hanshaw's cow, she was stretched out motionless on her side, and I had to look carefully to make sure she wasn't dead. But I got out my bottles of calcium with an airy confidence because I had been lucky enough to qualify just about the time when the profession had finally got on top of this hitherto fatal condition. The breakthrough had come many years earlier with inflation of the udder, and I still carried a little blowing-up outfit around with me. The farmers used bicycle pumps. But with the advent of calcium therapy, one could bask in cheap glory by jerking an animal back from imminent death within minutes. The skill required was minimal, but it looked very, very good. By the time I had injected the 2 bottles, one into the vein, the other under the skin, and Mr. Hanshaw had helped me roll the cow onto her chest, the improvement was already obvious. She was looking about her and shaking her head as if wondering where she had been for the last few hours. I felt sure that if I had had the time to hang about for a bit, I could see her on her feet, but other jobs were waiting. "Give me a ring if she isn't up by dinner time," I said, but it was a formality. I was pretty sure I wouldn't be seeing her again. When the farmer rang at midday to say she was still down, it was just a pinprick. Some cases needed an extra bottle. It would be all right. I went out and injected her again. I wasn't really worried when I learned she hadn't got up the following day. But Mr. Hanshaw, hands deep in pockets, shoulders hunched, as he stood over his cow, was grievously disappointed at my lack of success. And pardon the language here, it's time t'old bitch was up. She's doing no good laid there. Surely there's summat you can do. I poured a bottle of water into her lug this morning, but even that hasn't shifted her." "You what?" "Poured some cold water down a lug hole. Me dad used to get 'em up that way, and he was a very clever man with stock with me dad." "I've no doubt he was," I said primly, "but I really think another injection is more likely to help her." The farmer watched glumly as I ran yet another bottom of calcium under the skin. The procedure had lost its magic for him. As I put the apparatus away, I did my best to be hearty. "I shouldn't worry. A lot of them stay down for a day or two. You'll probably find her walking about in the morning." The phone rang just before breakfast, and my stomach contracted sharply as I heard Mr. Hanshaw's voice. It was heavy with gloom. "Well, she's no different. Lying there eating her head off, but never offers to rise. What are you going to do now?" What indeed? I thought as I drove out to the farm. The cow had been down for 48 hours now. I didn't like it a bit. The father went into the attack immediately. Me dad allus used to say they had a worm in the tail when they stayed down like this. He said if you cut tail end off, it did the trick. My spirits sagged lower. I had had trouble with this myth before. The insidious thing was that the people who still practiced this relic of barbarism could often claim that it worked, because after the end of the tail had been chopped off, the pain of the stump touching the ground forced many a sulky cow to scramble to her feet. "There's no such thing as worm in the tail, Mr. Hanshaw," I said. "And don't you think it's a cruel business cutting off a cow's tail? I hear the RSPCA had a man in court last week over a job like that." The farmer narrowed his eyes. Clearly he thought I was hedging. "Well, if you won't do that, what the hangment are you going to do? We've got to get this cow up somehow." I took a deep breath. "Well, I'm sure she's got over the milk fever because she's eating well and looks quite happy. It must be a touch of posterior paralysis that's keeping her down. There's no point in giving her any more calcium, so I'm going to try the stimulant injection." I filled the syringe with a feeling of doom. I hadn't a scrap of faith in the stimulant injection, but I couldn't just do nothing. I was scraping the barrel of it out now. I was turning to go when Mr. Hanshaw called after me. "Hey, mister, I remember something else me dad used to do. Shouting their lugs. He got many a cow up that way. I'm not very strong in the voice. How about you having a go?" It was a bit late to stand on my dignity. I went over to the animal and seized her by the ear. Inflating my lungs to the utmost, I bent down and bawled wildly into the hairy depths. The cow stopped chewing for a moment and looked at me inquiringly. Then her eyes drooped and she returned contentedly to her cutting. "We'll give her another day," I said warily, "and if she's still down tomorrow, we'll have a go at lifting her. Could you get a few of your neighbours to give us a hand?" Driving round my other cases that day, I felt tied up inside with sheer frustration. Damn and blast the thing! What the hell was keeping her down? And what else could I do? This was 1938, and my resources were limited. 30 years later, there are still milk fever cows which won't get up, but the vet has a much wider armoury if the calcium has failed to do the job. The excellent Bagshaw hoist, which clamps onto the pelvis and raises the animal in a natural manner, the phosphorus injections, even the electric goad which administers a swift shock when applied to the rump, and sends many a comfortably ensconced cow leaping to her feet with an offended bellow. As I expected, the following day brought no change, and as I got out of the car in Mr. Hanshaw's yard, I was surrounded by a group of his neighbours. They were in festive mood, grinning, confident, full of helpful advice, as farmers always are with somebody else's animals. There was much laughter and leg-pulling as we drew sacks under the cow's body, and a flood of weird suggestions to which I tried to close my ears. When we all finally gave a concerted heave and lifted her up, the result was predictable. She just hung there placidly with her legs dangling, whilst her owner leaned against the wall watching us with deepening gloom. After a lot of puffing and grunting, we lowered the inert body, and everybody looked at me for the next move. I was hunting round desperately in my mind when Mr. Hanshaw piped up again. "Me dad used to say a strange dog would always get a cow up." There were murmurs of assent from the assembled farmers and immediate offer of dogs. I tried to point out that one would be enough, but my authority had dwindled, and anyway everybody seemed anxious to demonstrate their dog's cow-raising potential. There was a sudden excited exodus, and even Mr. Smedley, the village shopkeeper, pedalled off at frantic speed for his border terrier. It seemed only minutes before the buyer was alive with snapping, snarling curs, but the cow ignored them all, except to wave her horns warningly at the ones which came too close. The flashpoint came when Mr. Hanshaw's own dog came in from the fields, where he had been helping to round up the sheep. He was a skinny, hard-bitten little creature with lightning reflexes and a short temper. He stalked stiff-legged and bristling into the byre, took a single astounded look at the pack of foreigners on his territory, and flew into action with silent venom. Within seconds the finest dog-fight I had ever seen was in full swing, and I stood back and surveyed the scene with a feeling of being completely superfluous. The yells of the farmers rose above the enraged yapping and growling. One intrepid man leaped into the melee and reappeared with a tiny Jack Russell hanging on determinedly to the heel of his Wellington boot. Mr. Reynolds of Clover Hill was rubbing the cow's tail between two short sticks and shouting, "Cush, cush!" And as I watched helplessly, a total stranger tugged at my sleeve and whispered, "Hast a tried a teaspoonful of Jay's fluid in a pint of old beer every 2 hours?" It seemed to me that all the forces of black magic had broken through and were engulfing me, and that my slender resources of science had no chance of shoring up the dike. I don't know how I heard the creaking sound above the din, probably because I was bending low over Mr. Reynolds in an attempt to persuade him to desist from his tail rubbing. But at that moment the cow shifted her position slightly, and I distinctly heard it. It came from the pelvis. It took me some time to attract attention. I think everybody had forgotten I was there, but finally the dogs were separated and secured with innumerable lengths of binder twine. Everybody stopped shouting. Mr. Reynolds was pulled away from the tail, and I had the stage. I addressed myself to Mr. Hanshaw. "Would you get me a bucket of hot water, some soap and a towel, please?" He trailed off, grumbling as though he didn't expect much from the new gambit. My stock was definitely low. I stripped off my jacket, soaped my arms, and pushed a hand into the cow's rectum until I felt the hard bone of the pubis. Gripping it through the wall of the rectum, I looked up at my audience. "Will 2 of you get hold of the hook bones and rock the cow gently from side to side?" Yes, there it was again, no mistake about it. I could both hear and feel it, a looseness, a faint creaking, almost a grating. I got up and washed my arm. "Well, I know why your cow won't get up. She has a broken pelvis. Probably did it during the first night when she was staggering about with the milk fever. I should think the nerves are damaged too. It's hopeless, I'm afraid." Even though I was dispensing bad news, it was a relief to come up with something rational. Mr. Hanshaw stared at me. "Hopeless? How's that?" "I'm sorry," I said, "but that's how it is. The only thing you can do is get her off to the butcher. She has no power in her hind legs. She'll never get up again." That was when Mr. Hanshaw really blew his top and started a lengthy speech. He wasn't really unpleasant or abusive, but firmly pointed out my shortcomings and bemoaned again the tragic fact that his dad was not there to put everything right. The other farmers stood in a wide-eyed ring, enjoying every word. At the end of it, I took myself off. There was nothing more I could do, and anyway, Mr. Hanshaw would have to come round to my way of thinking. Time would prove me right. I thought of that cow as soon as I awoke next morning. It hadn't been a happy episode, but at least I did feel a certain peace in the knowledge that there were no more doubts. I knew what was wrong. I knew that there was no hope. There was nothing more to worry about. I was surprised when I heard Mr. Hanshaw's voice on the phone so soon. I had thought it would take him 2 or 3 days to realise he was wrong. "Is that Mr. Herriot? Well, good morning to you. I'm just ringing to tell you that me cow's up on her legs and doing fine." I gripped the receiver tightly with both hands. "What? What's that you say?" "I said me cow's up. Found her walking about by her this morning, fit as a fiddle. You'd think there'd never been out the matter with her." He paused for a few moments, then spoke with grave deliberation like a disapproving schoolmaster. "And you stood there and looked at me and said she'd never get up no more. But, you're wondering how I did it. Well, I just happened to remember another trick of me dad's. I went round to butcher and got a fresh killed sheepskin and put it on her back. Had her up in no time. You'll have to come round and see her. Wonderful man was me dad." Blindly I made my way into the dining room. I had to consult my boss about this. Siegfried's sleep had been broken by a 3 a.m. carving, and he looked a lot older than his 30-odd years. He listened in silence as he finished his breakfast, then pushed away his plate and poured a last cup of coffee. "Hard luck, James. The old sheepskin, eh? Funny thing, you've been in the Dales over a year now and never come across that one. Suppose it must be going out of fashion a bit now, but you know it has a grain of sense behind it, like a lot of these old remedies. You can imagine there's a lot of heat generated under a fresh sheepskin, and it acts like a great hot poultice on the back. Really tickles them up after a while. And if a cow is lying there out of sheer cussedness, she'll often get up just to get rid of it. But damn it, how about the broken pelvis? I tell you it was creaking and wobbling all over the place." "Well, James, you're not the first to have been caught that way. Sometimes the pelvic ligaments don't tighten up for a few days after carving, and you get this effect." "Oh, God," I moaned, staring down at the tablecloth. "What a bloody mess I've made of the whole thing." "Oh, you haven't really?" Siegfried lit a cigarette and leaned back in his chair. "That old cow was probably toying with the idea of getting up for a walk just when old Hanshaw dumped the skin on her back. She could just as easily have done it after one of your injections, and then you'd have got the credit. Don't you remember what I told you when you first came here? There's a very fine dividing line between looking a real smart bet on the one hand and an immortal fool on the other. This sort of thing happens to us all, so forget it, James." But forgetting wasn't so easy. That cow became a celebrity in the district. Mr. Hanshaw showed her with pride to the postman, the policeman, corn merchants, lorry drivers, fertilizer salesmen, Ministry of Agriculture officials, and they all told me about it frequently with pleased smiles. Mr. Hanshaw's speech was always the same, delivered, they said, in ringing, triumphant tones. "There's the cow that Mr. Herriot said would never get up no more." I'm sure there was no malice behind the farmer's actions. He had put one over on the young clever pants vet, and nobody could blame him for preening himself a little. And in a way, I did that cow a good turn. I considerably extended her lifespan because Mr. Hanshaw kept her long beyond her normal working period, just as an exhibit. Years after she had stopped giving more than a couple of gallons of milk a day, she was still grazing happily in the field by the roadside. She had one curiously upturned horn and was easy to recognise. I often pulled up my car and looked wistfully over the wall at the cow that would never get up no more. 2. Siegfried came away from the telephone. His face was expressionless. That was Mrs. Pumphrey. She wants you to see her pig. Peak, you mean? I said. No, pig. She has a 6-week-old pig she wants you to examine for soundness. I laughed sheepishly. My relations with the elderly widow's Pekingese, were a touchy subject. All right, don't start again. What did she really want? It's Tricky Woo's bottom playing him up again. James, said Siegfried gravely, it is unlike you to doubt my word in this way. I will repeat the message from Mrs. Pumphrey, and then I shall expect you to act upon it immediately and without further question. The lady informed me that she has become the owner of a 6-week-old piglet, and she wants the animal thoroughly vetted. You know how I feel about these examinations, and I don't want the job scamped in any way. I should pay particular attention to its wind, have it well galloped round a paddock before you get your stethoscope on it, and for heaven's sake don't miss anything obvious like curbs or ring bones. I think I'd take its height while you're about it. You'll find the measuring stick in—" His words trailed on as I hurried down the passage. This was a bit baffling. I usually had a bit of leg pulling to stand ever since I became Tricky the Peak's adopted uncle, and received regular presents and letters and signed photographs from him. But Siegfried wasn't in the habit of flogging the joke to this extent. The idea of Mrs. Pumphrey with a pig was unthinkable. There was no room in her elegant establishment for livestock. Oh, he must have got it wrong somehow. But he hadn't. Mrs. Pumphrey received me with a joyful cry. Oh, Mr. Herriot, isn't it wonderful? I have the most darling little pig. I was visiting some cousins who are farmers, and I picked him out. He will be such company for Tricky. You know how I worry about his being an only dog. I shook my head vigorously in bewilderment as I crossed the oak-panelled hall. My visits here were usually associated with a degree of fantasy, but I was beginning to feel out of my depth. You mean you actually have this pig in the house? But of course. Mrs. Pumphrey looked surprised. He's in the kitchen. Come and see him. I'd been in this kitchen a few times and had been almost awestruck by its shining spotlessness. The laboratory look of the tiled walls and floors, the gleaming surfaces of sink unit, cooker, refrigerator. Today, a cardboard box occupied one corner, and inside I could see a tiny pig, standing on his hind legs, his 4 feet resting on the rim. He was looking round him appreciatively at his new surroundings. The elderly cook had her back to us, and did not look round when we entered. She was chopping carrots and hurling them into a saucepan with, I thought, unnecessary vigour. Isn't he adorable? Mrs. Pumphrey bent over and tickled the little head. It's so exciting having a pig of my very own, Mr. Herriot. I have decided to call him Nugent. I swallowed. Nugent? The cook's broad back froze into immobility. Yes, after my great-uncle Nugent. He was a little pink man with tiny eyes and a snub nose. The resemblance is striking. I see, I said, and the cook started her splashing again. For a few moments I was at a loss. The ethical professional man in me rebelled at the absurdity of examining this healthy little creature. In fact, I was on the point of saying that he looked perfectly all right to me when Mrs. Pumphrey spoke. Come now, Nugent, she said. You must be a good boy and let your Uncle Herriot look at you. That did it. Stifling my finer feelings, I seized the string-like tail and held Nugent almost upside down as I took his temperature. I then solemnly auscultated his heart and lungs. peered into his eyes, ran my fingers over his limbs, and flexed his joints. The cook's back radiated stiff disapproval, but I carried on doggedly. Having a canine nephew I had found carried incalculable advantages. It wasn't only the frequent gifts, and I could still taste the glorious kippers Tricky had posted to me from Whitby. It was the vein of softness in my rough life, the sherry before lunch, the warmth and luxury of Mrs. Pumphrey's fireside. The way I saw it, if a piggy nephew of the same type had been thrown in my path, then Uncle Herriot was going to be the last man to interfere with the inscrutable workings of fate. The examination over, I turned to Mrs. Pumphrey, who was anxiously awaiting the verdict. "Sound in all respects," I said briskly. "In fact, you've got a very fine pig there, but there's just one thing. He can't live in the house." For the first time the cook turned towards me, and I read a mute appeal in her face. I could sympathise with her because the excretions of the pig are peculiarly volatile, and even such a minute specimen as Nugent had already added his own faint pungency to the atmosphere in the kitchen. Mrs. Pumphrey was appalled at the idea at first, but when I assured her that he wouldn't catch pneumonia, and in fact would be happier and healthier outside, she gave way. An agricultural joiner was employed to build a palatial sty in a corner of the garden. It had a warm sleeping apartment on raised boards and an outside run. I saw Nugent installed in it, curled up blissfully in a bed of clean straw. His trough was filled twice daily with the best meal, and he was never short of an extra titbit such as a juicy carrot or some cabbage leaves. Every day he was allowed out to play and spent a boisterous hour frisking round the garden with Tricky. In short, Nugent had it made, but it couldn't have happened to a nicer pig, because, though most of his species have an unsuspected strain of friendliness, this was developed in Nugent to an extraordinary degree. He just liked people, and over the next few months his character flowered under the constant personal contact with humans. I often saw him strolling companionably in the garden with Mrs. Pumphrey, and in his pen he spent much of the time standing upright with his cloven feet against the wire netting, waiting eagerly for his next visitor. Pigs grow quickly, and he soon left the pink baby stage behind, but his charm was undiminished. His chief delight was to have his back scratched. He would grunt deeply, screwing up his eyes in ecstasy. Then gradually his legs would start to buckle until finally he toppled over on his side. Nugent's existence was sunny, and there was only one cloud in the sky. Old Hodgkin, the gardener whose attitude to domestic pets had been permanently soured by having to throw rubber rings for Tricky every day, now found himself appointed personal valet to a pig. It was his duty to feed and bed down Nugent, and to supervise his play periods. The idea of doing all this for a pig who was never ever going to be converted into pork pies must have been nearly insupportable for the old countryman. The harsh lines on his face deepened whenever he took hold of the meal bucket. On the first of my professional visits to his charge, he greeted me gloomily with, "Hast come to see Nudist?" I knew Hodgkin well enough to realise the impossibility of any whimsical wordplay. It was a genuine attempt to grasp the name, and throughout my nephew's old career he remained Nudist to the old man. There is one memory of Nugent which I treasure. The telephone rang one day just after lunch. It was Mrs. Pumphrey, and I knew by the stricken voice that something momentous had happened. It was the same voice which had described Tricky Woo's unique symptoms of flutbot and crackerdog. "Oh, Mr. Herriot, thank heavens you're in. It's Nugent. I'm afraid he's terribly ill." "Really? I'm sorry to hear that. What's he doing?" There was a silence at the other end, except for gasping breathing. Then Mrs. Pumphrey spoke again. "Well, he can't manage. He can't do his little jobs." I was familiar with her vocabulary of big jobs and little jobs. "You mean he can't pass his urine?" Well, she was obviously confused. "Not properly." "That's strange," I said. "Is he eating all right?" "I think so, but—" Then she suddenly blurted out, "Oh, Mr. Herriot, I'm so terribly worried. I've heard of men being dreadfully ill, just like this. It's a gland, isn't it?" "Oh, you needn't worry about that. Pigs don't have that trouble. And anyway, I think 4 months is a bit young for hypertrophy of the prostate." "Oh, I'm so glad, but something is stopping it. You will come, won't you? I'm leaving now." I had quite a long wait outside Nugent's pen. He had grown into a chunky little porker and grunted amiably as he surveyed me through the netting. Clearly he expected some sort of game, and growing impatient, he performed a few stiff-legged little gallops up and down the run. I had almost decided that my visit was fruitless when Mrs. Pumphrey, who had been pacing up and down, wringing her hands, stopped dead and pointed a shaking finger at the pig. "Oh, God!" she breathed. There it is now." All the colour had drained from her face, leaving her deathly pale. "Oh, it's awful. I can't look any longer." With a moan, she turned away and buried her face in her hands. I scrutinised Nugent closely. He had halted in mid-gallop and was contentedly relieving himself by means of the intermittent spurting jets of the normal male pig. I turned to Mrs. Pumphrey. I really can't see anything wrong there. But he's," she still didn't dare to look, "he's doing it in fits and starts." I had had considerable practice at keeping a straight face in Mrs. Pumphrey's presence, and it stood me in good stead now. "But they all do it that way, Mrs. Pumphrey." She half turned and looked tremblingly out of the corner of her eye at Nugent. "You mean all boy pigs?" "Every single boy pig I have ever known has done it like that." Oh, how odd. How very odd." The poor lady fanned herself with her handkerchief. Her colour had come back in a positive flood. To cover her confusion, I became very businesslike. Yes, indeed. Lots of people make the same mistake, I assure you. Oh, well, I suppose I'd better be on my way now. It's been nice to see the little fellow looking so well and happy." Nugent enjoyed a long and happy life, and more than fulfilled my expectations of him. He was every bit as generous as Tricky with his presents, and as with the little peak, I was able to salve my conscience with the knowledge that I was really fond of him. As always, Siegfried's sardonic attitude made things a little uncomfortable. I had suffered in the past when I got the signed photographs from the little dog, but I never dared let him see the one from the pig. Chapter 3. Angus Greer, MRCVS, was never pretty to look at, but the sight of him propped up in bed, his mottled, pop-eyed face scowling above a pink quilted bed jacket, was enough to daunt the bravest. Especially at 8 in the morning, when I usually had the first of my daily audiences with him. "You're late again," he said, his voice grating. "Can ye no get out of your bed in the morning? I've told you till I'm tired that I want ye out on the road by 8 o'clock. As I mumbled apologies, he tugged fretfully at the counterpane and looked me up and down with deepening distaste. "And another thing, that's a terrible pair of breeches you're wearing. If you must wear breeches to your work, for heaven's sake go and get a pair made at a proper tailor. There's nae cut about those things at all. They're not fit to be worn by a veterinary surgeon." The knife really went in then. I was attached to those breeches. I had paid 30 shillings for them at the Army and Navy stores, and cherished a private conviction that they gave me a certain air. And Greer's attack on them was all the more wounding when I considered that the man was almost certainly getting my services free. Siegfried, I felt sure, would wave aside my offers of payment. I had been here a week, and it seemed like a lifetime. Somewhere far back I knew there had been a brighter, happier existence, but the memory was growing dim. Siegfried had been sincerely apologetic that morning back in Darrowby. "James, I have a letter here from Greer of Broughton. It seems he was castrating a colt, and the thing threw itself on top of him. He has a couple of cracked ribs. Apparently his assistant walked out on him recently, so there's nobody to run his practice. He wants me to send you along there for a week or two. Oh no, there's a mistake somewhere. He doesn't like me. He doesn't like anybody. But there's no mistake, it's down here. And honestly, what can I do? But the only time I met him, he worked me into a horrible rubber suit and made me look a right chump. Siegfried smiled sadly. I remember, James. I remember. He's a mean old devil, and I hate to do this to you, but I can't turn him down, can I? At the time, I couldn't believe it. The whole idea was unreal. But it was real enough now as I stood at the foot of Greer's bed listening to him ranting away. He was at me again. Another thing. My wife tells you you didn't eat your porridge. Did you not like it? I shuffled my feet. Oh, yes, it was very nice. I just didn't feel hungry this morning. I had pushed the tasteless mass about with my spoon and done my best with it, but it had defeated me in the end. There's something wrong with a man that canna eat his good food. Greer peered at me suspiciously, then held out a slip of paper. Here's a list of your visits for this morning. There's a good few, so you'll no have to waste your time getting round. This one here of Adamson's of Grenton, a prolapse of the cervix in a cow. What would you do about that, think ye? I put my hand in my pocket, got hold of my pipe, then dropped it back again. Greer didn't like smoking. Well, I'd give her an epidural anaesthetic, replace the prolapse and fasten it in with retention sutures through the vulva. Havers, man, havers, snorted Greer. What a lot of twaddle. There's no need for that. It'll just be constipation that's doing it. Push the thing back, build the cow up with some boards under her hind feet and put her on linseed oil for a few days. Surely it'll come out again if I don't stitch it in, I said. No, not at all, Greer cried angrily. Just you do as I tell you now. I can more about this than you. He probably did. He should anyway. He had been qualified for 30 years and I was starting my second. I looked at him glowering from his pillow and pondered for a moment on the strange fact of our uncomfortable relationship. A Yorkshireman listening to the two outlandish accents. Greer's rasping Aberdeen, my glottal Clydeside. Might have expected that some sort of rapport would exist between us, if only on national grounds, but there was none. Right, just as you say. I left the room and went downstairs to gather up my equipment. As I set off on the round, I had the same feeling as every morning. Relief at getting out of the house. I had to go flat out all week to get through the work, but I enjoyed it. Farmers are nearly always prepared to make allowances for a young man's inexperience, and Greer's clients had treated me kindly, but I still had to come back to that joyless establishment for meals, and it was becoming more and more wearing. Mrs. Greer bothered me just as much as her husband. She was a tight-lipped woman of amazing thinness, and she kept a Spartan board in which soggy porridge figured prominently. It was porridge for breakfast, porridge for supper, and in between a miserable procession of watery stews, anemic mince, and nameless soups. Nothing she cooked ever tasted of anything. Angus Greer had come to Yorkshire 30 years ago, a penniless Scot just like myself, and acquired a lucrative practice by the classic expedient of marrying the boss's daughter. So he got a good living handed him on a plate, but he also got Mrs. Greer. It seemed to me that she felt she was still in charge, probably because she had always lived in the house with its memories of her father who had built up the practice. Other people would seem like interlopers, and I could understand how she felt. After all, she was childless. She didn't have much of a life, and she had Angus Greer for a husband. I could feel sorry for her. But that didn't help because I just couldn't get her out of my hair. She hung over my every move like a disapproving spectre. When I came back from a round, she was always there with a barrage of questions. Where have you been all this time? Or, I wondered wherever you'd got to. Were you lost? Or, there's an urgent case waiting. Why are you always so slow? Maybe she thought I'd nipped into a cinema for an hour or two. There was a pretty full small animal surgery every night, and she had a nasty habit of lurking just outside the door so that she could listen to what I was saying to the clients. She really came into her own in the dispensary, where she watched me narrowly criticising my prescriptions and constantly pulling me up for being extravagant with the drugs. "You're putting in far too much chlorodyne. Don't you know it's very expensive?" I developed a deep sympathy for the assistant who had fled without warning. Jobs were hard to come by, and young graduates would stand at nearly anything just to be at work. But I realised that there had been no other choice for that shadowy figure. Adamson's place was a small holding on the edge of the town, and maybe it was because I had just been looking at Greer, but by contrast the farmer's lined, patient face and friendly eyes seemed extraordinarily warming and attractive. A ragged khaki smock hung loosely on his gaunt frame as he shook hands with me. "Now then, we've got a new man today, have we?" "Have we?" He looked me over for a second or two. "And by the look of you, you're a pretty fresh-took job." "That's right," I replied, "but I'm learning fast." Mr. Adamson smiled. "Don't worry about that, lad. I believe in new blood and new ideas. It's what we want in farming. We've stood still too long at this game. Come into byre, and I'll show you the cow." There were about a dozen cows, not the usual shorthorn, but Ayrshires, and they were obviously well kept and healthy. My patient was easy to pick out by the football-sized rose-pink protrusion of the vaginal wall and the corrugated uterine cervix. But the farmer had wasted no time in calling for assistance. The mass was clean and undamaged. He watched me attentively as I swabbed the prolapse with antiseptic and pushed it back out of sight. Then he helped me build a platform with soil and planks for the cow's hind feet. When we had finished, she was standing on a slope with her tail higher than her head. "And you say that if I give her linseed oil for a few days, that thing won't come out again?" "That's the idea," I said. "Be sure to keep her built up like this." "I will, young man, and thank you very much. I'm sure you've done a good job for me, and I'll look forward to seeing you again." Back in the car I groaned to myself. Good job? How the hell could that thing stay in without stitches? But I had to do as I was told, and Greer, even if he was unpleasant, wasn't a complete fool. Maybe he was right. I put it out of my mind and got on with the other visits. It was less than a week later at the breakfast table, and I was prodding at the inevitable porridge, when Greer, who had ventured downstairs, barked suddenly at me. "I've got a card here for Adamson. He says he's not satisfied with your work. We'd better get out there this morning and see what's wrong. I dinna like these complaints." His normal expression of being perpetually offended deepened, and the big pale eyes swam and brimmed till I was sure he was going to weep into his porridge. At the farm, Mr. Adamson led us into the byre. "Well, what do you think of that, young man?" I looked at the prolapse and my stomach lurched. The innocuous-looking pink projection had been transformed into a great bloated purple mass. It was caked with filth, and an ugly wound ran down one side of it. "It didn't stay in very long, did it?" the farmer said quietly. I was too ashamed to speak. This was a dreadful thing to do to a good cow. I felt my face reddening, but luckily I had my employer with me. He would be able to explain everything. I turned towards Greer, who snuffled, mumbled, blinked his eyes rapidly, but didn't say anything. The farmer went on. "And you see she's damaged it. Must have caught it on something. I'll tell you, I don't like the look of it." It was against this decent man's nature to be unpleasant, but he was upset all right. "Maybe it would be better if you would take the job on this time, Mr. Greer," he said. Greer, who still had not uttered an intelligible word, now sprang into action. He clipped the hair over the base of the spine, inserted an epidural anaesthetic, washed and disinfected the mass, and with an effort pushed it back into its place. Then he fastened it with several strong retention sutures, with little 1-inch lengths of rubber tubing to stop the point cutting into the flesh. The finished job looked neat and workmanlike. The farmer took me gently by the shoulder. Now that's something like it. You can see it's not going to come out again now, can't you? Why didn't you do something like that when you came before? I turned again to Greer, but this time he was seized by a violent fit of coughing. I continued to stare at him, but when he still said nothing, I turned and walked out of the byre. No hard feelings, though, young man, Mr. Adamson called after me. I reckon we've all got to learn, and there's no substitute for experience. That's so, Mr. Greer, isn't it? Aye, okay, that's right enough. Aye, rightly so, there's no doubt about that. Greer mumbled. We got into the car. I settled down and waited for some explanation from him. I was interested to know just what he would say, but the blue-veined nose pointed straight ahead, and the bulging eyes fixed themselves blankly on the road ahead of us. We drove back to the surgery in silence. And in the first part of this chapter, I was doing Angus Greer thinking he was Yorkshire, and he's from Aberdeen, so apologies for the change of accent on there. And of course James Herriot is Scottish, and I have been doing him like how Christopher Timothy voiced him in the original All Creatures Great and Small. So I've been doing that for the last book and a bit, so I thought that would make it sound real, and thought Siegfried Farnan I would make Siegfried Farnan sound like Robert Hardy. I can't really remember what the other actor, Tristan, sounded like, but I've just given him a dull sort of accent, if you see what I mean. But thank you for listening, and we will read chapters 4, 5 and 6 next time.